Danny, great to have you on the podcast. How are you today?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jared. Really appreciate you having me. Excited for this.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. Let's kick things off. So let's assume there's people in the audience that are just getting to know you for the first time and the reservoir. So let's start with a quick intro on you and then a little overview of the reservoir.
Yeah, sure. My name's Danny Bernstein. I'm the CEO of the Reservoir, and my career really was in technology innovation. Built a company, sold it to Google, and then I was at Google for 10 years. Spent a couple years at Microsoft before wanting to approach technology in a very different way, and began to study markets and look where is there less technology saturation, and therefore technology can have a bigger impact. So if you think about something like the office, there's significant saturation. Cybersecurity, significant saturation. Even financial technology, significant saturation. But a lot of rural technologies don't have as much saturation, and there are many massive unsolved problems in rural markets and rural technology. And it's part of what has driven a lot of financial and economic inequity in rural regions, because you have a lot of technology needs but less technology origination in those markets. And I saw that it was a huge opportunity and decided to study it very deeply and then form a company around it. So we launched the Reservoir last year as a early stage venture capital fund, and pretty quickly we found an anchor investor. And what it let us do is focus on building our long-term strategy, which was around how do we de-risk early stage agricultural technology. So our original plan was to bring a existing technology incubator to rural California. That was our plan one, plan A. And then we realized that all of those were really not purpose built for ag. So that kind of led us to our next project, which is what if we, from the ground up, build a technology incubator that was really purpose built for the future of agriculture? And that's the Reservoir.
And talk me through some of the investments that you've made to date. And not to play favorites or anything like that, but like you can talk about a few of them if you'd like. And what was it about them that really first caught your eye and ultimately made you
So the primary investment that we've made is in building our incubator, and so I'll talk a little bit about that. So we spent over 6 months building from first principles our plan for what we call reservoir farms. We found that we studied rural incubators and accelerators really throughout the American West and then throughout the world, and found that that if you're an early stage ag tech company, you don't have options like Y Combinator and Techstars that really meet your needs around R&D. So there are over 7,000 startup incubators in the world, but none of them combine a working farm with a robotics incubator. Those two things. Those two things. And if you think about all the challenges we have with ag around labor, they are mostly going to be solved by robotics. And so we wanted to say, how could we make the development of early stage ag tech significantly more efficient? And so our first kind of like big investment has been in building this, and we're launching in Salinas Valley in a couple months. So Salinas Valley is the lettuce bowl of the world. It is a several billion-dollar agricultural industry, and so we are launching our first incubator in Salinas in just a few months before expanding to other locations in the West and then eventually internationally. From our fund, which is called Reservoir Ventures, we've invested in four companies. One is an autonomy platform called FarmNG. We've invested in two software companies, one that is tackling produce and the other's tackling water. And then we've also invested in a precision technology that essentially does fire detection or fire prevention.
talk me through what particular areas of like ag tech right now you're particularly bullish on
Yeah.
in 2025?
Yeah, great question. So we are focused on a few areas primarily. We're focused on robotics and autonomous systems. That's one. The other is precision agriculture, and the third is really software and AI enabled software. Those are the three primary areas. We're not focused on biologicals or ag biotech, and so there are other areas that we're not as focused on. And our primary focus really is on robotics and autonomous systems. So a lot of what drives that is labor. So California is a $55 billion ag market. 16 billion is put into labor, and roughly two-thirds of that is put into harvest. So it's billions and billions of dollars of labor, and that's just California. We can invest globally, but that's just kind of like the economics of California. Um, it, There are only a few exceptions, but the vast majority of fruits and vegetables harvest is not automated. So strawberry harvest is not automated, apple harvest is not automated, um, stone fruit harvest not automated, things like that. Nuts, you have shakers. So that's kind of a version of autonomy. And you have companies like Bonsai that are trying to kind of making that more autonomous. But really, the core micronutrients that we have on our plate, lettuce, asparagus, berries, apples, etc. Really, 99% of our micronutrients are extraordinarily labor-intensive crops that are slowly disappearing from being grown in the United States because they're too expensive to grow. And so we are very, very bullish on the development of robotics technology that will begin to meet those needs. And so robotics and autonomous systems primarily focused on harvest, but then there are also like a lot of non-harvest activities that are essential as well. A company that we love is called Beewise. And so they are a robotic beehive, and they do bees as a service for growers, and they're absolutely crushing it. They've raised over $100 million. So what we're seeing basically is that elements of the farm are becoming mechanized, and mechanization of farms is not new. It's been over 100 years since we converted from horses to tractors. But there is a lot of opportunity kind of in this vintage for automating the farm.
Will you do parts of like the animal ag tech as well? Will you
Mhm.
address that area?
It's a great question. We're not focused on that in particular. We're really focused on specialty crops, and so I think there are ag tech and there are investors who go very broad, and then there are others who just go super deep. And so our strategy is to go super deep. And so we want to be working directly with growers, help like working with them to identify very, very specific pain points and just living and breathing that world. And so our focus is really on growers, let's say, for specialty crops, and that's primarily fruits, nuts, and vegetables. And we're not focused on animal. We are focused on both on farm and contained environment. So that's a distinction that's worth making. We're very interested in evaluating, horticulture and contained environment technologies. I just went on a trip to the Netherlands and saw their unbelievable greenhouse ecosystem in Food Valley. The investment that we did, FarmNG, their product, the Amiga, is used in both on-farm and contained environments. So that's interesting to us. We're also interested in technologies for small, medium, and large farms. So there are robotics machines that cost over $1 million that, of course, a 30 to 40 acre farm just really simply can't afford even to finance, or even as a service model. It just doesn't pencil. So we're very interested in less expensive laser weeders, less expensive harvesters, things like that. We're very excited about kind of those things moving down market and becoming more accessible to small farms.
Talk me through a little bit about that trip to the Netherlands. Like, what were some of the cool things that you saw there as it relates to ag tech, and maybe what were some of the biggest differences there versus here as it relates to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in the Netherlands, they are a significant exporter of agriculture, and so it really feels like agriculture is a first class industry in the Netherlands. And I would contrast that with the U.S., where our first class industries are technology, entertainment, etc. And so there are a couple of ways that those differences become very, very material. One is that the agricultural buildings themselves are more updated. They're cleaner, they're more modern. And so I'm a bit of an aesthetic when it comes to buildings, and it's like eye candy when you drive down the highways and you're like these really beautiful, updated, modern barns that you just don't see in the US. And if you're driving on Highway 99, you'll see a lot of barns, but you'll see ones that are abandoned, slightly dilapidated. You don't see that in it's actually the inverse. If you see a dilapidated barn or kind of ag structure in Netherlands, it surprises you. So that was one thing. I was also really blown away by the focus on public-private partnerships. So the Netherlands is really, really good at how academia works with industry, and so it is in sharp contrast to our public university systems that are heavily reliant on federal government funding. So the UC system, for example, gets over $10 billion from federal funding. They're the largest recipient of federal funding, And as a result of that, they do have public-private partnerships, but they're really more oriented around federal funding. And the university system in the Netherlands, they do receive federal funding, but they're very oriented around how they work with industry. So I think there's a lot we can learn sort of in this Doge moment around how universities can be working really effectively with industry. I was touring Wageningen, which is the primary ag school really in Europe, and very often thought as the number one ag school in the world. And when we were touring the school, the head of industry partnerships pointed out a building to me. Said, "That's the Unilever building." And I said, "What do you mean that's the Unilever building? You mean they donated it?" And he said, "No, no, no, that's the Unilever building." And can you imagine walking through a college campus in the U.S. seeing a corporate office? You just wouldn't see it, right? And so it's so interesting in the Netherlands how you see that much more intertwined. So I love sort of absorbing all of that and getting a real clear feel for kind of, how it's done, how it works. It was super fascinating.
So if you could give advice to the US on maybe how to up their game based on some of those findings and realizations, right? What would be like 1 to 2 core pieces of advice that you think should be implemented? I love by the way, the corporate building on a college campus. That's really, really cool and something you never hardly ever see around here. The closest thing I would say to a lot of it is where MIT and Harvard, like MIT Harvard area, you'll have a lot of corporation there's a
Right.
something called the Microsoft Nerd Center right there.
Mhm.
That's pretty much on the campus. But not the same thing as what you're talking about. So yeah, what would be like 1 to 2 pieces of actionable advice that like the US like ag tech ecosystem can adopt from say the Netherlands?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, the one that we're the most focused on is creating highly desirable physical spaces for ag tech incubation. And we want to be able to imagine going to a roboticist that works at Google, that works at NVIDIA, and saying, come to Salinas, come to Merced. Um, let's tour you through the ag region and show you the kinds of facilities that are available to you. And we want them to be able to say, wow, ag is an extraordinary place to be. I get to work outside. I get to work on next generation challenges, on next generation equipment, and I get to solve real problems in the real world. And when you're in the Netherlands, because of the quality of that ecosystem and where you really feel like agriculture is a first class citizen as a segment of technology, you just get the sense that it is a really great place for entrepreneurs. You don't get that sense when you're in many parts of the American West, but I think that's a solvable problem. And I'll give you a small example. Um, Imagine you have a test farm in a place like Yuma, Arizona, or Fresno, California. Can we make sure that there are very comfortable office spaces, machine shop availability, laser cutter, 3D printer, just like the basic things, so that when that company is doing testing, that they have comfortable places to be. So we let roboticists be roboticists. We let them focus on the things they do best, and we just let them work and solve problems and collaborate with growers. So I think there's some really kind of like low-hanging fruit that we're focused on, which is how do we really make a soft landing for a lot of ag tech entrepreneurs to be able to operate in these test environments. And I think you really see that when you're in the Netherlands, when you're in these like beautiful glasshouse spaces. You just really feel like it's a good place for entrepreneurs. And where they're really envious is that they don't have the venture capital ecosystem that we have. So I think our opportunity is significant. Like we have the venture capital ecosystem of the San Francisco Bay Area just Sorry, my dog. We have the venture capital ecosystem of the San Francisco Bay Area, just a couple of hours from one of the most productive agricultural regions in the world. I think if we figure out how to marry those two things together, sort of for once and for all, I think we could see a extraordinary age of innovation.
How do you envision the integration of AI and machine learning into farm robotics really evolving over the next, let's say, 5 years? And I guess what impact would that have on farm operations?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're going to see sort of technology suites from the NVIDIAs, the Microsofts, and the Amazons of the world. Those are already being adopted in a farm context, and so we can do a better job of making sure that, let's say, the average ag tech entrepreneur is plugged into what's available from the existing sort of mega providers, the mega platform companies. And I think that there is recognition of that because I talk to entrepreneurs every day who are building on NVIDIA tools, they're building on Microsoft tools, etc. Those things will get even closer. And so what will we begin to see? We'll see better perception. We'll see better algorithms, better applied AI. We'll see finer and finer robotics. We'll see more of the robotics sort of solutions and systems that are coming out of Silicon Valley be applied to real world conditions. And so it's going to have a significant impact. I think our charge as investors and as ecosystem people is to make sure that the NVIDIAs, Amazons, and Microsofts are paying really, really close attention to what some of the on-farm opportunities are, to make sure that their products are adapted to these real world conditions. If you think about self-driving cars versus on-farm robotics, and you compare those two, what is if a self-driving car is successful, it's because it avoids objects. If an on-farm robot is successful, it's because it interacts effectively with objects. Those are drastically different problems. And so I think that the underlying technologies are there. And then the question is, how do we adapt them into some of these more interactive and messier environments?
The frameworks are there, but it's still so different because like there's so many things that are being created at all these top tech companies that you can basically take that framework, apply it to another industry or space, make little adjustments and it'll work. But in this case, right, when you want to engage instead of avoid, it's, I mean, they can do it, right? But it's still different than what they've done in the past. Super interesting. I'm really excited to see how the space continues to evolve. And I'm glad that we connected. Definitely.